You're listening to the Mother to Baby podcast, medications and more during pregnancy and breastfeeding. Ask the experts with your host, genetic counselor and mom of three, Chris Stallman.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Mother to Baby podcast. My name is Chris Stallman. I'm a mom of three and a genetic counselor. I work at MotherToBaby, specifically in Arizona. And in case you're just joining us for the first time, MotherToBaby is an organization of professionals who are trained to provide information about exposures during pregnancy and breastfeeding, as well as pre-pregnancy and also for cases of adoption. And so we cover everything. We cover things like hair dye, nail polish, medications for anxiety and depression, other medications, exposures in your workplace, and anything that you can think of, we will absolutely try and help. Today's episode is a very special one that's close to the hearts of a lot of people. It is in honor of Maternal Mental Health Month, which coincidentally is May, so perfect timing. And today we have a lot of good things going on. So of course we have an expert on hand to answer our questions from the public. So we are going to have questions about mental illness and mental health in pregnancy and breastfeeding. We also have two very special guests that are going to share their stories with us. So we do have one mom who has her own experience with anxiety and depression in the pregnancy and after pregnancy breastfeeding time. And later on in the show, stay tuned because we have a woman who was able to use her experience with a high-risk pregnancy in order now to help other moms and babies in the same situation. So it's going to be a really exciting show. We are going to run just a little bit longer today, but we have so much to pack in. I hope you stay around for the whole thing. And enough from me. We're going to jump right in. So today's expert guest is one that I'm very pleased to welcome to the show. Her name is Dee Quinn, and not only is she a genetic counselor with many years of experience in the field, but she also has a really interesting background. So Dee originally received her bachelor's of nursing from the University of Bridgeport in 1975, and then spent a few years as a psychiatric nurse. So she has a lot of background dealing with mental illness. After that, she went on to get her genetic counseling degree from Sarah Lawrence College in 1981, and then she was certified by the American Board of Genetic Counseling since 1984. She was the original counselor on the line in Connecticut. The service that is now called Mother to Baby Connecticut was started by Dee back in the 80s. She then transitioned to the University of Arizona. She has been part of the Mother to Baby Arizona program since 1989. She has been part of the previous genetic counseling program that was housed at the University of Arizona from 95 until 2005. That program is being restarted, and the first class is filing in August. We're really excited about that. And of course, Dee is program director. And she has a long history with the Organization of Teratology Information Specialists. So we call that OTIS for short. And for those of you just turning in or who need a refresher, OTIS is the professional society that provides the mother-to-baby counseling service. An all-around wonderful person. She's an excellent educator, a wonderful mentor, and I'm lucky enough to call her colleague and friend. So Dee, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Chris.
So we're going to take our first caller today, and on the line we have Angela from Maryland. Angela, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Angela. Thank you so much for calling in today.
Thank you.
So before we get into your questions, I have here that you have some personal experience with mental health because of your previous pregnancies. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that with me and our listeners?
Sure, yes, absolutely. So I spent 6 weeks on bed rest for my daughter, and it was one of the loneliest times in my life. Even though there were people around me, I felt alone. I felt terrified for the health of my daughter, even though I had exceptional medical care. So it was a very difficult time in my life. 6 very difficult weeks. Then later on, when I got pregnant with my son, I ended up being on bed rest for 15 weeks with him. And it was such a challenge because I was going through all of these emotions, but I didn't have anyone to talk to who could understand what this felt like. Ultimately, it inspired me to create a support group online called Keep 'em Cookin'. And it's a way for women to connect with each other in an online community, and they can talk to one another anonymously about what they're going through.
I have never been on bed rest in my pregnancies, and I can't even imagine what that would be like. And I'm a trained professional. Like, I'm supposed to, be able to help people and navigate their tough situations. And even then, with the complexities of being on bed rest, it's a wanted pregnancy, you want to be there, but at the same token, it must be incredibly difficult to be in that position.
It is for so many women. It's absolutely the most difficult time of their lives. And, emotionally, what you're feeling is anxiety, frustration, helplessness, guilt. I mean, these are about the worst emotions that anyone could have to live with day after day. And the thing that women talk about a lot is fear. You are on bed rest because something bad could happen to you or to your baby. It's a constant fear. Most obstetricians aren't going to put you on bed rest unless there's a serious issue there. It's not routine for them. It's going to be something where you're having bleeding or extremely high blood pressure, your water has broken, you've had episodes of preterm labor, anything where the life or health of the mother or child is at risk. So for many of these women I talk to, we're talking about living in fear for months.
Wow. And I'm sure that takes an extreme emotional toll for anybody in any situation. And then, what I heard you describe is that, you had your pregnancy with your daughter, it was 6 weeks, and then your pregnancy with your son, which was about 15 weeks. But at the time that you were on bed rest with your son, you also had another child in the house. How did that work?
Yes, that's something that comes up with the women on the Keep 'em Cookin' forum a lot, because so often it's how we space apart pregnancies. So all the time, you have, the woman who is going through this high-risk pregnancy, and she inevitably tells me, and I have a 3-year-old at home. And it's just, it is so difficult because so many of your roles have changed. You're not working anymore. You're not an equal spouse. But the worst guilt is not being there for your child. Those other relationships have more to do with you and someone else. In this case, it's your child, and they can't always understand what you're going through and why you have to do it. Actually, I wrote a book with Jennifer Deagle. We co-authored a book, and it's called Stuck in Bed, and it actually is a book all about helping moms and kids deal with those kinds of issues. It's a children's book, and it's bright colors, and it talks about all the ways that mothers can speak positively to their children about bed rest, and things that you can find to still do together. And so it's big. It's mother guilt is the worst guilt.
I would have to agree with that. That is something that I know a little bit about, but it doesn't, the situation, of course, are going to be different, but yeah, that universal feeling of not being enough of whatever it is. And
yes, exactly.
You also touched on something else earlier, not being an equal spouse. That phrase alone, to me, right now, you said that, and I got chills. The idea of when you're pregnant, like you said, you're having most likely a serious medical issue. Nobody is put on bed rest for fun. You may not be working outside of the house anymore. You may not be able to work inside the home anymore. You may have other
Right.
children. And then on top of all of that, you're with your life partner and you don't feel like you're measuring up to that part of the task either. And what was that like for you?
Somehow my husband put up with me. That's all I can say. He just somehow he managed. It's hard because, oh gosh, it's just you see everything put on them, and there's nothing you can do to change that. And you can tell yourself that you are doing the most important job in the world because you are. You are doing everything you can to get your baby here safely. But this is your life partner. This is the person who's most special to you, and you see them coming home from work and having to deal with laundry and making, and grocery shopping and food and all those other things where normally you would be partners, but now all of it is on them.
So, Angela, thank you so much for that preview background. And so, what questions do you have that we might be able to answer for you?
Sure. Well, so this is a question that I had and many of the women I talked to had. One of the challenge is because of activity restriction, you're not able to do the things you normally would do when you're feeling down. Someone would tell you, get some sunlight, go for a walk, get some exercise, go out with your friends, but you can't do those things. So what advice do you have for these women? What can they do when they're depressed? And then what are the risks of untreated depression?
Thanks for that question, Angela. It must be a tough one to have to be so tied to bed rest when you're anxiously awaiting the end of the pregnancy. I would say that there are varying degrees of activity, and so some women are able to get out of bed for very short periods of time. And so for those women, I would suggest going outside and getting some fresh air and sunlight. But if you are really unable to leave bed rest at all, then some of the things you can think about is having friends visit. I think that would be my choice, because you at least get some company and you can while away some hours with your friends. You can also read and watch TV, although I can only imagine that can get boring after a while. But certainly, it's a difficult issue when women are on bed rest for a very long time. To get to the second question, we do know that there are some risks from maternal depression that can affect the baby. And they're both physical and emotional issues. So there's some evidence that women who have untreated depression are have a higher chance of having a baby that's either born early or born small for their age. In addition, there are certainly emotional effects, many of which we can't measure. And I think I want to point out at this point that stress is different for different people. And our bodies react differently to it. So it's very hard to look at whether stress has an adverse effect on the baby, because we all respond to it differently, as well as probably our babies in utero respond differently. But certainly it makes sense to try to minimize the amount of stress and depression as much as possible.
Yeah, Dee, that's a tough one. Having friends over, I think, as appropriate is a really, really good idea. And these days, too, especially, at least I know I am guilty of being completely attached to my cell phone device. And so even things like FaceTiming with friends and family, and of course, the internet is there. But like you said, with reading and TV, it gets to be a little much after a while. But yeah, those are all good suggestions. Some people I know do needlework and crafting at the same time. So, and Angela actually has another question.
So yes, another question that comes up often and was a question for me as well. relates to taking antidepressants or anxiety medications during your pregnancy because, you can't necessarily do all those normal things that you might do otherwise. So is it safe to take antidepressants or anxiety medications during pregnancy?
And Dee, I know you have a lot of experience with this. And Angela, if you don't mind, we're actually going to broaden that up a little. Not just antidepressants or anxiety medication, but any kind of treatment for depression or other mental illness in pregnancy, Dee. What are your thoughts about the treatments that are out there versus untreated depression?
So, yes, Chris, that's a great question. There are a number of medications that can be used in pregnancy and breastfeeding, which we'll get to in a minute. But there are also many other treatments that are available and should be used in any woman who has untreated depression during pregnancy. So there are treatments such as cognitive behavioral therapy. That's usually what's described as talk therapy, which can be very helpful. There are women who use acupuncture, massage, and other alternative treatments. I do want to make a comment at this point about that we're generally uncomfortable with the use of herbal medications. And the reason for that is that since they're not regulated by the FDA, we're never completely sure what products are in the substance. But in addition, there's very little information on their use in pregnancy and breastfeeding. So the issue of using herbal medications, and I know that many people like to use natural products, is a little problematic for us because we have so little information about their use in pregnancy and breastfeeding. Now, there are medications that can be used, and the most common categories are antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications. A word about the anti-anxiety medications. These are often referred to as benzodiazepines or benzos. They are often prescribed on a short-term basis for someone who has depression at the same time that an antidepressant is used. So generally, individuals will prescribe the antidepressant and the anti-anxiety for a week or two until the antidepressant medication starts to work. However, there are women who have specific anxiety disorders, like a panic disorder, where anti-anxiety medications may be useful throughout the pregnancy. Now, both of these categories, the antidepressants and the ones that we use most commonly these days, are called SSRIs, have been studied with their use in both pregnancy and breastfeeding. But of course, the studies have been small, and we would obviously prefer a lot more information. What we know about the antidepressants in pregnancy is that it depends on when they're used. And so if they're used in the first 3 months, the period of time when the baby's organs are growing and developing, there may be a slightly increased risk of having a child with a heart problem. Now, let me just go back a minute and say that anybody who gets pregnant has between a 3 to 5% chance of having a child with a birth defect. So that means between 3 and 5 out of every 100 women, just because they're pregnant, and these are women who have no family history of birth defects, and their pregnancy has gone well, and they haven't taken any medications, everyone has that risk. And so the question we have to answer is does using antidepressant medication in the first 3 months increase that risk? Most studies have shown that it does not. A couple of studies have shown there's an increase in the way the heart is put together. But just as an aside, 1 out of 100 babies is born with a problem with the heart. So this is a very common birth defect that we see in women who have not taken any medications in pregnancy. And there's some studies have shown a small increase in that problem with the development of the heart. Most of the other studies have not shown those increases. Some babies whose mothers use antidepressants throughout pregnancy can have some adverse effects at when they're born. So they can be a little jittery. They may have some sleep disturbances. They may have some temperature disturbances and some rapid breathing. Those go away quite quickly and are generally not associated with the baby having to stay in the hospital any longer. The anti-anxiety medications have been studied quite a bit because they've been around a lot longer than the antidepressants. We do not see an increase in birth defects for women who have used them in the first 3 months. The main concern with the anti-anxiety medications, and this has nothing to do with pregnancy, but just in general, there is a small potential that they can be addictive. Not like the opioids, that have made a lot of news today, but there can be some withdrawal in babies whose mothers take a large amount of anti-anxiety medications throughout pregnancy.
And that too, Dee, and if I'm mistaken, please correct me, but this is why we always encourage women and providers, whomever we speak to make sure that everyone's on the same page with the medications you are taking, with the doses, in case it needs to be changed. That way, even if the baby does need some additional care or monitoring after pregnancy, so after delivery or even in the breastfeeding period, then they can do what's appropriate as long as they know exactly what mom is taking.
Right. So all of mom's healthcare providers, and that would include her psychiatric providers as well as her obstetric providers, and then certainly, you're right, later the pediatricians should be aware of the medications that mom is taking.
And also, Dee, I think that it would be a good idea to mention the postpartum period. So, of course, we know that, depression, other forms of mental illness don't stop for a lot of women, either in pregnancy or after. And with the news coverage about postpartum depression, I know there was a new medication recently released and a lot of attention that, has been present in the past couple of years even. We absolutely want to get to breastfeeding. But before we do, Dee, let's go ahead and take another call. We have Jennifer Deagle from New York on the line, and she started an advocacy movement called SpeakingForMomsAndBabies.com after she herself experienced a high-risk pregnancy and gave birth to a baby at 23 weeks. So just a little bit over halfway through her pregnancy, they refer to a baby born that early as a micro-preemie. And so she used her experience to now make a platform to emphasize advocacy and have support for moms who are struggling with mental illness. Hi, Jennifer. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. So if I understand this correctly, you have some unique experience when it comes to maternal mental health and pregnancy and delivery. Is that right?
That is right, unfortunately.
Would it be possible for you to share some of your experience with us?
Yeah, I'd love to share my story with you. My daughter was born at 23 weeks gestation back in 2012, and that was caused by a very high-risk and life-threatening pregnancy. She was my fourth pregnancy and was diagnosed with something called placenta prurita. So that was quite traumatic. It's something, undescribable because you don't know if your baby is going to survive, and that's a whole different level of stress and trauma. And then you're also being told that you may not survive. And I didn't also actually almost lose my life really 4 times, officially 1 time, but really 4 times. They had to kind of give me extra blood and whatnot to bring me back, and it was quite scary. So that started my experience with maternal mental health. And my daughter was born at 23 weeks. She was 1 pound and 4 ounces, and she spent 121 days in the NICU. And that basically took everything from all the stress that I had from when I was pregnant with my daughter, back on bed rest, and it just added to that. And essentially, I had a severe case, I would say, of PTSD, or even what now some of it's being called perinatal mood anxiety disorder. for most women that are experiencing a high risk pregnancy like me, the everyday uncertainties of what could happen to their baby, if they're going to lose their own life, that in itself is very traumatic. And that fear becomes part of your daily routine as a high risk mom. You wake up with it every day. You think about it all day. That, of course, can be coupled with if you have other children, and I had 3 other boys that were 3, 5, and 7 at that time. So then there's the guilt and fear of what's happening to them, not meeting their needs, and if they could lose their mom. And that is an all-day, everyday feeling. And that all of that happens before the baby's even born and taken to the NICU if you end up delivering a premature baby. And I want to mention, too, there really is no simple diagnostic criteria to identify what a traumatic pregnancy or traumatic birth experience is. I just recently read a statistic that over 94% of every pregnancy has at least one complication. And for some moms, that one complication can be very traumatic, and for some moms, it's not. So it's really kind of an issue like the trauma lies in the eye of the beholder. It's a really individual feeling, and for some people, they can process it well, and they move along, and everything is great. And for others, even if they heal, quickly and their baby is fine, those same feelings, if they weren't addressed early on, can linger, and it can be very scary for, even 1, 2, or 3 years. Sometimes I hear from the moms that I talk to.
That sounds like it was incredibly, unimaginably difficult in terms of, all the different pieces, not just you, not just your baby, but your family, everything together. Was there something or maybe several things that helped you cope either during or after when you were beginning to heal, both physically and emotionally? Was there something that stood out to you that would be helpful for other moms in a similar position?
Yes, I would say journaling, and I push that to almost every parent group I talk to, or even the neonatologist or the nursing staff, is to get the moms and dads, anybody who's experiencing this in the family, to start to journal. And it's not that easy to do. I mean, I have no background in writing. I am a science teacher. At that point, I'd been teaching high school biology and earth science for 14 years, and a very scientific thinker and writer. But the nurse gave me a piece of paper when I was stuck in the bed and I couldn't do it. I was really almost losing my mind. I was very emotional. I was crying. They were trying to give me sleeping pills to sleep, but they just made me more upset, and I was hallucinating, and I really, really struggled. A couple of nights, the nurses would just sit with me. Like they designated one role to one nurse to sit with me the whole night because they were afraid of I was going to try to escape the room or leave or do something, and I had, bags of blood being transfused into me, and I guess it was dangerous. Looking back in hindsight, I think I was in shock too. But once I started to write down what I was thinking, I felt better. And it's something for me that just kept going. My daughter spent that 4 months in the NICU, and I just kept writing and writing down every day what the doctor said, what the nurses said, what I was feeling. And I noticed then that I started to relax and feel better, because it's the kind of therapy and it's venting, and also it takes the stress out of trying to remember what the doctors and nurses tell you every day about yourself or about your baby, and you're writing it down, and you don't have to worry about what am I going to ask the nurse tomorrow, what did I forget, what did they say, and just write as much down as you can. And luckily for me, after my daughter came home from the NICU, she was about 2 months post-discharge, so about 6 months old. I went back and I read the entire journal. And it was like kind of an aha moment, because it showed me how much progress I made and she made from the beginning of that time in the journal to where we were now. And that really helped a lot with the healing, truthfully. So I really do believe that writing is very, very powerful. And, for me, it turned into a book, but it doesn't have to do that. It could just be something that you just keep to yourselves, and even maybe keep for your child to read one day if it's not too traumatic. As just kind of a bit of a memory, and again, to show the progress.
I think too that, some people feel that getting it out in whatever form is what's best for them. But I do think that writing is unique in that some people that I've encountered, so some patients and some friends even, had said, I really do want to talk to somebody about it, but I don't want to put the burden of my feelings on my partner, my parents, my children, whomever, even friends or other doctors, or even in a support group. They go in saying, already everyone else around me is dealing with so much. And you know how a lot of women are. They don't want to add anything extra to anyone else. And for some people, writing is a way to give yourself that release and still be able to literally close the book. You can just close those feelings if that's what you need to do for now. You can hold them for later. You can reread them, as you said, which is, I'm sure, a great way not only to document, but if and when they come in and say, she's doing better today. You wrote down that someone in the medical field who is actively caring for you and your family said that. So now you can go back and look at that and say, oh, she said that she's doing better. He said that things are looking up. And that too, I think, has its own value and its own catharsis.
Yeah, I agree. And what you said is very important, because as moms, we are just going to be on kind of autopilot. And once your baby is born, that is your focus. And it's just the way it is. And it's really difficult to then speak up for yourself and say that you're having some emotional issue and emotional need because you're caring for your baby. And we feel selfish, and it isn't right, and we shouldn't do that. But a lot of moms just feel guilty asking for anything for themselves after they have a baby to take care of, whether it was premature or healthy full term. They really aren't speaking up about what's going on in their heads and what happened and what they need.
I would agree with that. Again, not only from professional experience, but personal experience with friends. It's one of those things that I feel that we can't solve. How do we stop feeling guilty, make time, all those things that come off rather flippantly, in my opinion. Like, people just sort of say them like, yeah, of course you got to take care of yourself. Yeah, of course you got to tell people how you're feeling. Well, that's not the way it gets portrayed. That's not the way it really is. It's like, oh, well, someone's in a worse situation, or you should be grateful for what you have, and aren't things looking up? And, it comes with all of these other feelings and emotions where it's just like, okay, I don't even have time for that. I need to charge full speed ahead. I have 4 children now, one of them who has a lot of needs. I have, other things going on in my life. Some people work inside of the home, outside of the home, have partners, have other relationships, and you put it all together at once. And almost invariably, again, in my experience, one of the last things that we as women and mothers take care of are ourselves and our personal needs.
Yeah, and we're also feeling guilty because more than likely the perfect birth plan in your head is not what happened in reality.
Yes.
And I really believe that affects a lot of parents, even if they had to have a C-section and they didn't want to, or if they had to take medication and they weren't planning on that. And then, of course, breastfeeding, which is super, super important. But there is so much pressure on these moms to do that. And if it's not going well or not getting enough, that's a whole nother layer of guilt. And I think that's something that, people really should keep talking about. Of course, it's the best if you can do it and do it well, but it doesn't always work that well, just like your birth doesn't always go like you planned.
I agree. And some people end up mourning the loss of what they had hoped for, that perfect birth experience, which we know nothing is perfect, but the idea, like, yeah, I had a music playlist and my husband was going to hold my hand the whole time. He wouldn't have to be ushered out into scrubs, and they didn't worry about me crashing. They weren't bringing in, a resuscitation cart, or even just, it happened in a way that I didn't anticipate. Even if there were no large complications, people mourn the loss of what they thought it was going to be. And personally, when I had my son and thought that breastfeeding was going to go well, and it didn't, and I needed to stop because I didn't make enough milk to feed my baby, which is its own issue. But for a long time, and through therapy, I learned to mourn the loss of the breastfeeding relationship I wanted to have with him, but still get up and go on with my day.
Yeah, and I deal with that with a lot of the NICU moms. I've written quite a bit about grieving the pregnancy, because when you have a preemie or micro preemie before 26 weeks, you're not pregnant for too long. And for a lot of the moms, they really grieve that, but then they feel bad grieving that because of course nothing compares to losing a child, and it's not comparable in any way. But when you were planning on being pregnant for so long and you're planning on, looking bigger and having maternity clothes and doing all of the things that you wanted to do, and then nursing your baby perfectly and everything was going to go, the way that you had planned, and that doesn't happen, you really grieve the pregnancy and how it was like taken away from you. And then of course you add to that it's your body, because even if your husband or partner is around and super supportive, it wasn't their body.
Right.
So the moms are always, they're just going to feel that, because all of these issues really should be talked about more, not even for, partners and spouses, but for the moms to know that they're not the only ones feeling it. And it's actually normal to feel sad about all of these things. I've gotten to know a lot of other high-risk moms. I was in Albany a few weeks ago pushing a bill about maternal health in general, morbidity and mortality, and it's now funded in upstate New York for the whole state. And I met a lot of parents there too, and it's unbelievable that everybody is not talking about this stuff all the time, because the stats are high and there's a lot of support needed, yet there is just not enough out there.
I agree. And Jennifer, congratulations on securing funding from the state legislature. That is a major accomplishment.
Yeah, that's exciting. And they're supposed to be tracking all of these high-risk births now, and traumatic births, and of course maternal morbidities, and using that information to prevent them. I actually do have a couple of questions I would love answers to as I go around and advocate. I didn't have to at that point take medication for my emotions, because everything kind of hit me a few months later, almost a year later. But for the moms that are, recognizing early on that they're struggling emotionally with a traumatic birth or anything in their delivery, are there more medications that are out there that, are more highly recommended, or moms like that are safer for nursing and pumping? Because I get asked that question all the time, and I don't have a good answer for that.
And that is something that we at MotherToBaby get questions about all the time as well. So I'm going to kick that over to our guest, Dee. Dee, you want to take a stab at answering that question?
Well, I do think the postpartum period is extremely important. Some women have mental health issues during the pregnancy, and for those women, we need to be very alert to symptoms in the postpartum period. But some women seem to do fine in pregnancy and have trouble in the postpartum period. So there are screening tools that obstetricians use both during pregnancy and postpartum, as well as many pediatricians use that to try to identify those women who are struggling with some concerns in the postpartum period. Now, for women who are breastfeeding, it turns out that most medications enter breast milk in extremely small amounts. So remember that the mother takes the medicine, it gets through her bloodstream, and then it has to get through the milk to the baby. And for the vast majority of medications, there's less than 10% of the mother's dose that gets to the baby. So it's a really very small amount. And for that reason, there certainly are medications, again, the SSRI antidepressants, that are frequently used for women struggling with depression or anxiety in the postpartum period.
And Dee, I'm really glad you mentioned that about mom's dose. And that's why we ask questions like, how much are you taking and how long are you taking it? Because depending, if baby's already getting a little dose, which, is going to be good in most cases, less exposure, the better. But, if mom's taking a lower dose anyway, so even less than, what she may imagine. And of course, we go over that in pretty good detail. But I'm glad that you mentioned that medications do get into breast milk, even in small amounts, because what we get a lot, of course, is, it gets into the breast milk. Well, that may be true, but it also depends on more than just, does it get into the breast milk, or in pregnancy, does it cross the placenta? It may, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be harmful.
Right. And there have been some fairly good studies that have looked at longer-term outcomes in women who have used either anti-anxiety or antidepressant medications during pregnancy and or the postpartum period that have not shown any adverse effect on the baby's development. And I think that that's a question that women worry a lot about. These are medications that work on your brain. And so I think many women worry that it may have some effect on the baby's brain. And the studies we have done of those children, so for instance, when they're in school, show that they do as well as any other child in school.
Yeah, that I think is a really great point because too, we get, they're doing okay now. That's great. But what about the future? Will this somehow change things? So thanks for addressing that. And Jennifer, if I may, I would like to thank you not only for, sharing your story, but also for your efforts to try and change the way things are handled for moms and babies and families in general, because we do focus on moms and babies, but we are part of a larger community. So I would like to thank you for your work, for your efforts, for your candor, your honesty, and most importantly, your time. And if I may end with one question, how is your daughter today?
She is amazing. She's almost 7, and she has some lung issues from her extremely premature birth. She's had pneumonia, fairly often. But other than that, everything is great, and she wants to be, she calls herself a baby doctor when she's older, and she's very excited about that. So thank you for asking.
Oh, no, thank you again for being here. We really do appreciate it, and I know our listeners do too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, what a great episode. So much good information, so many great questions. Dee, Angela, Jennifer, thank you so much for being part of this today. We really do appreciate it. And to you listeners out there, I hope that we were able to address some of the questions or concerns that you may have. What I do want to remind you, though, is if we didn't, or if you need more information, you're always free to contact MotherToBaby. We do serve the entirety of North America. And as always, there's a bunch of ways to contact us. So you can go to our website at MotherToBaby.org. Also on MotherToBaby.org, you can go to /podcast for more episodes and information. It's also going to tell you how to contact us directly. So there's a couple of ways you can do that. You're able to do that on the website itself through our chat feature. You can always reach us toll-free by phone at 1-866-626-6847. You can reach us via text message at 855-999-3525. And of course, you can always catch us right here on the podcast. And if you have any topics or questions that you would like us to address on the podcast, email us directly at contactus@mothertobaby.org. And who knows, if you're interested in being a caller, we might just have you on the show. We also encourage you to subscribe to the MotherToBaby podcast, which is available on iTunes, Google Play Music, Spotify, and most podcatchers out there. Just search MotherToBaby, that's MotherToBaby, no spaces, and hit follow or subscribe so you don't miss an episode. As always, we're very happy for you to join us, so thank you so much for listening. And remember, MotherToBaby is here for you. Take care.
MotherToBaby is a service of the nonprofit organization of Teratology Information Specialists and supported by the Health Resources and Services Administration of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. It's made possible through generous donations from listeners like you. To learn more about MotherToBaby, please visit MotherToBaby.org.